There was a pretty big thunderstorm going on this night. Nothing dangerous or anything, but enough to keep everyone inside for the rest of the day. I'm one of those people that enjoy rainy nights or even storms. Something about it just makes me feel cozy and relaxed. Whenever there was a night like this, I'd always spend it on the couch, watching TV and listening to the rain. Luckily, I didn't have work the next day, and although it was already 8 p.m., I decided to make a hot cup of coffee and stay up as late as I could to enjoy the cozy night. I sat down and turned on a movie. It was only 20 minutes into the film when my phone started ringing. I picked it up and looked at the number, but didn't recognize it. However, the area code was from this city. I answered just in case, always worried it might be something important or someone I knew, but just didn't have the number saved. Hello. No one said anything. Can I help you? Hello. Still, no one spoke. Oddly, I could tell it wasn't a dead line. I could hear background noise. It was messy, and after thinking about it for a couple of seconds, it kind of sounded like the storm or rain outside. So I knew someone was there, but they just weren't talking. Feeling weird, I hung up. I couldn't really think of any reason someone would call and say nothing. I figured it had to be a mistake or some kind of scam, even though it wasn't the typical robot voice or whatever. I tossed my phone back on the end table and continued watching TV. I got pretty well into the movie, probably an hour through, when in just a matter of seconds the storm outside got increasingly louder, thunder, lightning, and heavy rain. Then the TV and lights flickered. They quickly turned off, then right back on in a split second. I paused the movie and looked around, not sure what was happening. Then, not even 30 seconds later, the power went out. Suddenly, the entire house was silent, and the storm was twice as loud. Rain was flooding onto the roof and against the windows, and there was heavy, non-stop thunder for what felt like 5 whole minutes. The only light I had was a small candle that I basically never used. Obviously, I had my phone too, but I didn't want to waste its battery, especially since I didn't know how long this would last. I lit the candle, then figured I'd just double-check the breaker box downstairs. I went down and saw the switch was loose. I flipped it back and forth, but it was completely dead. I went back upstairs and really had nothing to do but watch the storm out the window. I also noticed all the other houses down the entire street were dark as well, so it looked like it was a pretty bad power outage. My phone was running off of 5G data, so I checked if there was any information on the status, but there was nothing. I was probably standing there by the window for about 15 minutes, watching and listening to the storm, when completely out of nowhere, I heard something from outside the house. I immediately recognized the sound. It was the gate to my backyard swinging open. That gate didn't have any sort of lock on it, but it never just swings open like that. Really? Not having any idea what it could have been, I walked to the back of the house and looked out the back door. Even through the darkness, the storm, and everything, I could see the shadow of a man. They had clearly just come from the side the gate was on, but he was just standing in the rain in the middle of the backyard. I could really only see his outline. He just looked like a dark figure. I couldn't tell where he was looking. Was he looking toward the house at me, or was he facing away from it? I didn't know what he was doing out there, but it gave me a bad feeling. I know I could have opened the door and yelled at him to leave my property, but I felt kind of nervous. I mean, if he was crazy enough to just be walking around outside in the middle of a massive storm like this, it wouldn't be far off to assume that he had a gun or something. I thought it was best not to confront him, so I just stayed by the door and watched. He didn't move for an entire minute, until his arm slowly lifted up from his pocket and he put his hand by his head. I didn't know what he was doing, but I could see a small glowing light in his hand. And just when I realized what it was, my phone began ringing in the other room. It didn't take me more than 2 seconds to understand what was going on. This random guy outside my house was calling me. That's why I could hear the rain on the other end of the phone earlier when he wasn't saying anything. But that was an hour ago. Had he been out in the storm, standing outside my home the whole time? Freaking out, I hurried into the living room and grabbed my phone, confirming it was the same number. Then, without answering it, I went back to the door. The man was gone. This freaked me out. Why didn't I just stay by the door and keep an eye on him? I felt stupid. I didn't like standing by the door though, knowing he might be somewhere out there watching me while I couldn't see him. I went back to the living room. I thought about calling the cops, but I really didn't know what to say, like someone called me twice and was outside my home. But I had no proof it was the same person or that they were doing anything wrong, aside from being in my backyard. Not too long later, my phone rang again. It made me jump, even though I was half expecting it. That's how freaked out I was. I declined to call, and only seconds later, a loud knock came from the front door. They called again while continuing to knock on the door. These were heavy hits too, shaking the walls of the house. I turned my phone on silent, and embarrassingly, I kind of froze up and did nothing. I know how dumb that sounds, but I've never been in a situation like that before. And when you add in the storm and the power outage, it just made it all worse. I think it took 30 seconds and for them to begin hitting the door even more aggressively before I finally snapped out of it and called the police. My hand was shaking as I held the phone. They said an officer was heading over right away and was about 4 minutes from me. I continued to inform them of what I knew, and the man didn't let up hitting the door. This went on for the entire time I was waiting for the cop to arrive. Finally, the operator said they were on my street. A few moments later, I heard someone yelling. I hurried up to the window and just caught sight of the officer chasing him. They ran off into the storm, and I couldn't see anything after that. I think I waited 2 minutes before the officer came back, empty-handed. The guy was able to get away. I was actually impressed by how much the police department tried to help me, though. They did a pretty thorough investigation and seemed to take it seriously, probably because they actually saw and chased the guy. But the only real lead was the phone number, and it ended up being a dead end. I tried coming up with anyone who would be out to get me like this, but I had no idea. The case kind of died out, and since then I've never gotten any calls from that number or seen anything else.